Because you see, the people who run the world are becoming more and more panic-stricken because a world is ending. Their world is ending. The world of the shell game and the international corporation and the propagandized passive electorate and all these things that game is ending. And there is no substitute vision being discussed at the upper echelons of the control mechanism of this society. It's coming from the grassroots. The people at the top are too paralyzed with the poisons they've imbibed by feeding at the trough of the old order. They can't think their way out of their dilemma. In fact, they have to pay guys with ponytails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They're so distant from the things they rule, you see. They're so distant from the things they rule, you see. They're so distant from the things they rule, you see.
The mark of the beast is the mark of the elite. One world government is a myth. Fear one world corporation. The beast has many titles. Prince of Darkness, Lord of Lies, Ruler of Hell.
I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago, or what I thought was a conference. It was really just a few billionaires around a table. Human beings, but billionaires. And their concern, I thought it was about, their shareholders or their money or this. Their real concern, when push came to shove, ended up being the apocalypse. And one of them finally asked me the question that was burning deepest in his heart or his mind. He wanted to know, how can he maintain control over his security force after the apocalypse? In other words, he'd bought his land in, Anchorage or New Zealand or the middle of the desert, and he was building his facility and planning to have some kind of security force there to protect him from the motorcycle gangs or whoever is angry and wants his stuff. But how do you maintain a security force when your money might not be worth anything anymore? And so I started to play these kind of Walking Dead-like scenarios along with him. Like, well, I guess if you have them and their families there, then, they're going to want to be part of your little mini nation state. Or I guess if you know the combination to the lock on something that they need, or, maybe if you use robots instead of humans, then the robots will still obey you because, they don't really need food and they're programmed to. And I kept playing these kind of scenarios with them, which was fun in a science fiction way. But eventually I told them the truth, which is this insulation equation that I've been thinking about, which is that you can either, think about how much do you need to do and plan in order to insulate yourself from the tragedies in the rest of the world versus what could you do to prevent those tragedies to begin with. In other words, you can earn a whole lot of money to insulate yourself from poverty and pollution and GMOs or whatever's out there, or you could spend your time and energy making the world a place that you don't feel the need to insulate yourself from it. And, as I spoke with them, I could tell they truly did want to be able to let go. They wanted to live in a world that welcomed them, in a world where they didn't have to build walls. But they were really weighing how much money do they need to protect themselves against extreme situations and social unrest, versus could they spend some of that money? Could they let some of it go and promote the public welfare instead? And it was a real calculation I saw them making in their heads, and it was kind of bizarre. So I let them know, the average CEO, back in the 50s, only made 20 times the average employee. It's the 50s and the 60s even. And today, the average CEO makes 271 times the average employee. And that's because in the old days, America in the 20s, in the 30s, 40s, or 60s even, CEOs couldn't imagine taking as much as they do now. Part of that, yes, is because tax laws were structured in a way where the wealthy paid 90% on earnings over the first million or so anyway. So the idea of earning more than that, why bother if you're going to pay 90% of it back? Yeah, they changed the tax code thinking, I guess, it would make America this more entrepreneurial place, that everyone could now want to become a Zuckerberg or a Gates. It led to more billionaires, but way, way more poorer people. Everyone else got poorer. To that, the CEOs argued, they said, well, the middle class now lives better than kings did in medieval times. The middle class, they've got electric heaters, they have changes of clothes, they have running showers. And if you were a king in 1200, you didn't have any of that stuff. It's like, yes, maybe that's true in the sense they've got heat and the change of clothes, but maybe not in that they've got no security, no safety net. One illness, one fire, divorce, or a flood can bring them to total bankruptcy and destitution. And even through their arguments, the CEO's common fear, the fear of these billionaires anyway, is really social unrest. That the division of wealth that they in part have created will become so severe that the tactics being used by marketers now to keep people afraid of one another and suspicious of authority will ultimately backfire. That's the way they understand Trump. That the techniques of reality television and spectacle TV, making people suspicious of one another so they don't share stuff and so they buy more things for themselves, and not just meals ready to eat for the apocalypse, but their own lawnmower, their own house, their own keep up with the Joneses competitive atmosphere, that is backfiring in the form of Trump and his followers. And so they showed me a set of scenarios that they had drawn up by global business network futurists. And all of these scenarios, these are people that you pay, futurists that you pay tens of thousands of dollars to come in, listen to you, and then they draw up these usually 4 future world scenarios based on the things that you're talking about. And all of these future scenarios involved one form or another of walking dead post-apocalyptic violence. And they're not even thinking about how to position their companies for such outcomes, but themselves. They're spending their time and attention on Plan B, on what to do when it all goes bad, which, at least according to them, is inevitable sooner or later. They make money now by denying climate change, which will give them more resources to survive when climate change actually happens. So what did I tell them? Well, I told them that this is a stupid strategy for 2 reasons. One, it won't actually work. When climate change happens, when the social unrest happens, the scenarios, the things that they think that they're building now that will protect them from future threats won't actually work because they're not predicting the real future threats that will come. They'll protect themselves against ticks and get bit by a mosquito. They'll protect themselves against social unrest and get whacked by a nuclear power plant. It won't actually work. You can't shield yourself from human civilization, from climate change, from the collapse. And second, it's not too late. Why prepare yourself for a catastrophe you won't survive, at least not in the way you'd want to live, instead of preventing that outcome or at least mitigating its worst effects right now? Now, you can't go it alone. You will not make it. Being human is a team sport. So take less, circulate more, and the outcomes you're imagining need not turn into realities. And what does any of this matter to those of us who can't even consider buying land in New Zealand and Anchorage or staffing our outposts with robot security forces? Because the people who are in a position to act on these impulses currently control a vast majority of the world's capital. They have hoarded the planet's value, bought the land from under our feet, mismanaged the administration of our economy, and are now hoarding even more in order to defend themselves from the rest of us when things go south. And no, they are not the enemy. They're just scared humans. The enemy is the extractive system they can't see beyond, the zero-sum game they use to understand the human project, and the way that zero-sum mentality trickles down to you and me. There are much weirder, more loving, and more cooperative ways of understanding the human project.
Look around you, the entire global civilization is undergoing some kind of meltdown. The planet itself is now to be seen as a kind of alchemical retort. The prima materia to be transformed are the nuclear stockpiles, the toxic waste dumps, the industrial wastelands, the populations devoid of hope, the populations at threat of infectious and fatal epidemic disease. Trying to manage this rationally with some political ism, fascism, Marxism, capitalism, goes nowhere. It just digs us deeper into the mire and the muck. At the fringes, people like yourselves, people like myself, people I associate, offer endless solutions. Recycling, restraint in childbearing, increased sexual, toleration of unusual sexual styles. Many, many things are suggested, but nothing happens because the primary agenda of society has not yet been dissolved, has not yet come into a state of fluidity sufficient where a new imprint can be put upon it.
Angle and going in this building and everyone putting on their nice clothes and all is just kind of strange, and in some ways even a waste of time. It's like if you're taking all these rich people and all these hours and all this money they're spending on this building to go sit in there and pray these 3, 4, 5 hour things when they could just be out doing stuff. All the sitting around and praying just felt like an indulgence. You do as much prayer as you have to arm yourself or to fortify yourself to just go out in the world and do what you have to do. But I was in there, and other than reading all the footnotes in the Torah things, which is kind of cool to do, I was listening to the prayers, and it was one of them is called Unatana Tokef. It's this prayer that they do on the high holidays, which is really creepy. It's a medieval poem, and it's like, and this is, between, on Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. Who will live and who will die, and who will get sick and who won't. It's this whole idea of the book of life, and God's like writing the names of the people that are going to die that year in this book. So you're supposed to pray a lot or whatever that you're not in there. But the idea that the poem doesn't say that you're supposed to pray whether or not you get in there. Interestingly, at the end, it says, you can't really change what God's going to write in that book, who's going to get sick and not, who's going to die and not. But if you can maintain some sense of community and connection to other people, that will lessen the severity of the decree. And that was kind of an interesting one, the idea that, that the reason why we're all together, the reason why we're sitting here in this room is that at least if you've got other people around, the bad stuff that's going to happen won't quite be as bad. It won't quite feel as bad. And as I looked through all the prayers and the kind of stuff that the Jews have been reading, for 500 or so years since these prayer books were developed, it's such a rough world out there they're describing, with wars and enemies and persecution. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, gosh, this is kind of describing this moment. Look at all these enemies and wars and what our leaders are doing and senseless conflicts and this sense of danger and waking up each morning and not knowing if something's going to happen. And it really drove home the idea that I've gotten to live my life, and most of us alive now have gotten to live our lives in a very exceptional moment. And I mean exceptional in the sense that it was an exception. It was weird to not be at war. It was weird not to wake up each morning not knowing if someone's going to invade your town or attack your family. The reality is what we're moving into now is actually more normal, or if not normal, at least more typical of how humans live. Wake up, oh, someone just killed 60-something people in Las Vegas with a machine gun at a concert. Or, oh, Puerto Rico just got nailed by this huge hurricane of probably human origin, but the huge hurricane, and look at what happened there. This earthquake happened, or this war is going on, or now we're worried about the actual survival of the North Korean and South Korean people, given the potential for a nuclear war there. This is normal. So you have to ask, how do you live when this is normal? How do you live when every day you kind of squint before you open your phone because you don't know what the notifications from CNN or the New York Times are going to be, or you kind of hold it a couple of feet further away? How do you orient? Because the impact of each one of these assaults, and I mean like news assaults, information assaults, the impact is to go into fight or flight mode. That's the natural human response to threat. The norepinephrine comes out and you move into fight or flight, which is a solo, survival-based reptile mindset. The reptile isn't thinking, how am I going to work with my community to build resilience together against coming? No, it's, where do we go? Where's my gun? Where do I go? Where do I hide? Where do I have my food? What about my family? How do we change this response? Well, the way to change that response, the way to not respond in that fight or flight norepinephrine survival mode, is through some kind of conscious training, through, meditation or prayer or community, which allows us to restore the social bonds so that we can respond and function to threats as a team rather than as panicked individuals. We can absorb the blows together, and that lessens the decree.
One of the things Tim Leary said in the 60s that I always remembered, but I never heard anybody talk about or ever really heard him quote. It was a great rallying cry. It was much better than turn on, tune in, drop out. And it was this. It was find the others. Find the others. And then you will know what to do. Well, now you can find the others. You don't have to stick a flower in your hair and go to San Francisco. You just go to the web. Find the others. We all need to create affinity groups, which are subsets of the much larger community that we're part of. And then, using this technology, which was designed to keep track of us, to pick our pockets, and to sell us junk we don't want, use this technology to produce art. Massive amounts of subversive art. And all art is subversive. I'm not calling for an ideological agenda. All truth which springs from the individual is subversive because, and this is a theme of mine that I'm getting more and more into the longer I live, culture is not your friend. All peoples, meaning tribes, have horrible stories to tell about who they did under and who they screwed over. And when you're asked to identify with your culture, you're asked to take this on. I reject it. My brother, years ago, he invented this term. He called it extra-environmental. He said, this is what we want to be. We don't want to be Americans or Germans or English. We want to be extra-environmentalists. Always feel wherever you go that you are a stranger, the outsider, the one looking in. This is the viewpoint that makes all places the same to you. There's a wonderful English poet and writer, Rudyard Kipling, and he wrote a children's short story called The Cat Who Walked by Himself. And it's a story of how the dog came to the cave of man and would lay at the man's feet, but the cat would never come. And when the woman asked the cat why it would never come, it said, I am the cat who walks by himself, and all places are alike to me. And I think transcending our cultures is going to be extraordinarily necessary for our survival. I don't think we can carry our cultures through the keyhole of the stretch of the next millennium. Well, how do you shed your culture? How do you transcend your culture? By digging into your soul with the tools that have been given you to make art. This is how cultures are transformed, by art which flows up and actually submerges the previous cultural forms. I mean, the Baroque gave way to later periods simply out of exhaustion. But notice, a style can exhaust itself and still continue, as mannerism did out of the Renaissance, for example. And when these exhausted styles are allowed to continue, they become toxic. They become moribund. It's like keeping a corpse around the house. There is an obligation to overthrow that, to produce the new, to produce the novel. And by the novel, I don't mean the literary form, I mean all things new. And then it is not the function of the artist to be the critic. The winnowing out, the deciding what is good from what is bad comes later. And that's a community process. The community decides what is good and bad art, but the individual should pour this forth. I mean, this is what you are. You are some kind of a mystery suspended between two eternities. And in that moment, when a mind looks out at a world and asks the question, what is it? In that moment, art can be created. And it is the only form of immortality that I have any certainty of. And it's available to everyone.